there is a cultural oddity that never quite made sense to me. You do not announce a pregnancy too early. Names were chosen silently as though speaking it aloud might anger something older than medicine. Your body isn't candidly representative of yourself. It isn't representation of our species. Your body is a brainchild of great advances. Some of the strongest decisions that we make and some of our strongest reactions to the world aren't learned in the moment. When you were a small floating shrimp with no opinions and no eyebrows, your body was reacting to things long before it even understood them. For years, I thought we were just predisposed to this. We're constantly scavenging for identity, trying to name our dispositions. Learning that our biology makes assumptions about the world before we're born, it reframed identity as something the body carries for us, written into cells, shaped by histories we've never lived, and mistaken for who we are. If you could see your DNA under a microscope, it looks busy, crowded, like it's trying its best. While that DNA is being assembled in utero, layered on top of the genetic code, are tiny chemical doodles or methylation groups, a system that decides how strongly different genes are expressed. The methyl group is attached to the cytosine base of a DNA molecule. Epigenetic literally means above the gene. It decides which instructions to emphasize and which to hold in reserve. DES, a drug that was prescribed to pregnant women to prevent miscarriage from the early 1940s through the 70s. It seemed reasonable at the time. It was reassuring. And with the right pill, everything would be fine, right? Except what it did was interfere with endocrine signaling. The daughters of the women who took DES showed higher rates of infertility and rare reproductive cancers. And those effects didn't always stop with them. In some cases, it would show up in the next generation as well. This is what that inheritance can feel like. Squinting at a pregnancy test, willing a second line into existence, saving nursery ideas that are just for later, begging your body for signs of cooperation. You feel for warmth where life should be beginning, in a womb that feels emptied out and desolate. What a particular cruelty. By the time the damage becomes visible, the disruptor is long gone and sealed into bodies. What makes transgenerational inheritance harder to dismiss is that it holds even in the absence of human experience or a narrative to emote toward. Male mice were trained to fear the smell of cherry blossoms by pairing the scent with mild shocks. Their offsprings, who had never encountered the scent or the shock, also showed heightened fear to the same cherry blossom smell. An olfactory receptor gene showed altered methylation. In other words, a sensory memory was passed down biologically. The neural circuits of the baby mice made a prediction. Fear is created twice, once in the mind and then in reality. In this case, this is a body that learned fear before the mind ever had the chance to. Now, why are all bodies equally bad at drowning? The Bajau, masters of the sea. For generations, their lives have been built on breath hold diving. They fortified themselves with wooden masks, a weight belt, and a single breath. Some dives would go deeper than 70 meters. Children would grow up watching adults disappear beneath the surface for minutes at a time. Some reach depths that most of us would associate with equipment and not human muscle. It was found that, on average, the spleens of the Bajau are much larger, releasing extra oxygen-rich blood during a dive. Whole genome scans identified a handful of selected variants, particularly in a gene which is a key regulator of peripheral vasoconstriction during apnea, and in a gene that essentially enlarges the spleen by raising thyroid hormone levels. The Bajau don't feel exceptional to themselves. This is just what a body looks like when it grows up knowing what it's for. Bodies are discerning readers. When pregnant rats inhale the fungicide vinclozolin, it reprograms stem cells and leaves distinct DNA methylation across many generations. When pregnant rats inhale this fungicide, it seeps inwards, circulates, reaches the soft, unfinished stem cells that will one day become eggs or sperm, and lodges itself there. These marks survive and carry forward intact, faithfully across generations. The inhalation of this fungicide results in increased tumor incidence in the female offspring's little organs. If this sounds a little uncomfortable, I'm glad. Discomfort means I still have your attention. When a group of genes, the Yamanaka factors, were activated, it returned stem cells. It returned cells to stem cells, a more youthful state. Activation of these groups of genes and activation of these factors restored aspects of vision, improved cognitive function, reversed signs of biological aging. This proves that the epigenome is flexible. So we've established that parental physiology is the information that developing bodies use to determine what the world outside is like. And they alter their genes to improve survival in that expected world. But modern environments risk disrupting the signals that these developing bodies pick up on, making the gene expression maladaptive. Evidently, protecting a public health system which is preserved with fidelity, it determines whether the biological information carried forward is coherent or contaminated. We already know enough to act. Chemicals like industrial toxins or plastic additives are allowed to influence human biology long after we know they disrupt normal gene control. They must be backed by mandatory biological safety testing before approval for use. Research must shift toward long-term studies that track how microbiome exposure, diet, and milia shape epigenetics and shape gene regulation across a lifetime and into later generations. The National Institute of Health Epigenomics Roadmap already shows a starting model. Expanding it to include multiple generations would finally allow us to distinguish chance from true cause. New gene control tools that can switch chemical tags on or off at precise locations are already being tested. Funding their safe development could allow targeted correction of disease-linked biological errors without changing the DNA code itself. These must keep pace. As we gain the ability to edit epigenetic marks, of course, science cannot evolve alone. The rules around it have to be just as transparent. For most of human history, biology has adapted unintentionally. Biological inheritance has adapted unintentionally. Famines, synthetic exposure, chronic stress, these forces rewrote gene regulation. Now, we're beginning to see a feedback loop. We can measure stress hormones in populations. We can track how air quality alters inflammatory signaling. We can correlate childhood adversity to long-term shifts in gene regulation tied to metabolism, immunity, and mental health. These abstract correlations in biology are fundamentally becoming more legible. Epigenetics is a wildly captivating realm. It challenges traditional perceptions of heredity. The next generation is building their bodies from the environment that we give them. So now that environment is our responsibility. Inheritance happens when gene regulation is still impressionable. It leaves chemical annotations that outlast the moment that caused them. So when I think about that silence around early pregnancy now, I no longer hear superstition. I hear the quiet pangs of a waiting room that we treat pregnancy as. I hear a maternal instinct that knows beginnings are permeable. She is a mother, a grieving one, but a mother nonetheless. Her body was just too compromised at the anatomical level to carry a life through. Thank you.